Good morning, guys, and welcome to episode 2 of the Slingshot Chronicles from the Jester's lab. Weather's crap this morning, so I thought I might as well get to work on the second episode. Let me switch some lights on in here so we can get better lighting, because episode 1 was a bit lacking, let's say. Right, so this morning we're going to talk about choosing a frame and processing it. So let's start talking about the types of wood used for a slingshot frame. Hello, puppies. My doggies are here saying hello. Types of wood used for a slingshot frame. Well, you can use anything really, but I tend to prefer a dense wood. We don't have many forests in Malta, so really you got to source the wood where you can. I usually collect it off felled trees trees that they've cut down for roadworks. I mean, the things are going away for mulch anyway, so I might as well cut a few nice forks off them. We had a couple of bad storms at the start of the year. There was a cypress tree that fell over down the road that I used. So any coniferous pine, any stone fruit, cherry, peach, citrus, any tree that bears the weight of fruit, usually has really strong forks on it, and that's what you want. You want the natural fibers, of the wood to run through the fork, and that way you've got the most sound bit of wood that you can use for a fork. So let me just pull out some boxes and tell you exactly what happens with my wood and how I process it. Okay, so the guys are here surrounding me and trying to figure out why I've pulled all my forks out. They only usually see them coming out one by one. What's doing, Mocha? What's Papa doing? Okay, so what happens is, when I get forks from outside, move Conrad, move matey. When I get forks from outside, usually they're off trees that have been felled by bad weather. So what I do is I cut the forks. As you can see, I've got a heap of them here, and we'll discuss a bit the shapes and things. So what I do is, when I find the fork, I actually put a date on the bottom of it. Like I just collected this on the 10th of the 10th a couple of weeks ago. This is off a nice pine tree. It'll make an awesome slingshot. But I gotta let it age. Usually I leave them about 8 months and then just give them 30 seconds in the microwave when I get them done, just to be sure that it's totally dry. I mean, you can see them steam. Sometimes they do tend to crack at the ends here, right here, when they dry up. So what I do is I always cut the fork with a bit of extra length, in the hope that the crack won't work its way down to where I want to cut it. When I do eventually cut it, I kind of hold the slingshot in my hand like that. Like that. Hello, Tootsie. And just cut 1 inch above where my fingers sit, and the same down the bottom over here. And as you can see, I leave these bits of wood here because sometimes they act as a really good palm swell. Alright, so next step is, once you've aged the wood, move, Mocha darling. Move, honey. These are not sticks to play with. These are slingies, mate. These are future frames. Okay, so now, once they've passed the age of... By the way, these are all olive over here. And as you can see on the side of the box, as it says here, olive, July 2019, from the tree apocalypse. We've had a bunch of trees torn down in the area for road upgrades, and these are proceeds from that. So now I've got wood. Move, dogs. Now I've got wood here that's been curing for quite a few months. So we got cherry wood, which is really nice. I really like the cherry wood because it has these rings on it, and if you actually carve down to those rings, you get some really nice colors thrown up. Here's a big citrus thing that I will eventually carve up, make into a nice big rock lobber probably. Now some people like their frames symmetrical, like the one I showed you from the Cypress here. Some people like them like that, right? And that's great when you're firing a hammer grip. However, I tend to thumb brace or pinch grip, in which case sometimes a frame like this, non-symmetrical, seems to sit better in the hand. It sits better with the natural curvature of the fingers, like so. So you'll find that a lot of my frames are not symmetrical, because ultimately I make these frames for myself. This is kind of almost symmetrical. This will eventually end up a fat pickle fork shooter. You can really see what I was talking about, cracks down the bottom there. See them? That's because it's dried up. The guts have dried up in it. You can see them up the top too here. But they only run down a few millimeters down the wood, so if you make the wood longer than what you need it, then it won't be a problem. So this will make a nice one. Sometimes I get really twisted, weird bits of wood, you know. Sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. I've got a couple of really strange frames that seem to work. So that's about wood choice. Now, I'm not going to sit down and actually make a slingshot in front of the camera because that takes forever. So basically I'm going to walk you through the steps. Now, what you need to begin with is a very sharp knife. And let me see if I can find on my disaster of a bench the knife that I use to whittle my slingshots. Unfortunately I can't find it. But it's a industrial hardened steel, really super sharp knife that you can shave your arms with. So basically what I do is I start with a frame. Let's say, let me take an example. This frame here. So as you can see, one of the limbs is thicker than the other. So this one really we can't make a symmetrical frame out of. We're going to have to whittle away this one. So what I do is I actually debark it, take the bark off the whole thing, and then I start whittling away down here. I'll show you a few finished examples. I'll start whittling away until that and that are equal. What I like to do, let me swap hands because I'm actually a right-hander. What I like to do is I like to get a rasp and cut a groove over here with the rasp and a groove for this finger, for my index finger, just so that they nestle nicely. And then I wrap the slingshot around like this. And as you can see, there's that kind of angle my fingers run at. And I get a pencil and I draw a line down the middle of each finger with a pencil. 1, 2, 3. And up for the index finger here. So that's how I make my handles, and eventually I just rasp it down, rasp it down, rasp it down. I take away anything that doesn't look like the slingshot that I want at the end of the job. Okay, now let me show you some that have been, this is by the way, tons and tons and tons of sandpaper. Usually on the average frame takes, I reckon, between 4 and 6 hours of sanding to get it where you want to get it. Basically the finishing, what you do is you start sanding it with, usually I use 60 grit sandpaper just to take out the filing marks. And then I progressively move up with the grits until I get to 600. I found that 600 is the best, pretty much the best finish that you can get. It gives you a nice shine and it allows grip. Now what I also do is, you find that once your slingshots have been smoothed out and everything, if you get them damp, they kind of go fluffy again. Reason is that as you are sanding, you are ironing down the slightly longer fibers in the wood, and they kind of sit there until they get wet and they swell up and it goes all furry again. So I found through trial and error that if you sand it down, spray it with water and handle it a bit so it gets rough again, and then sand it down again and keep on doing this process, repeating this process until it doesn't rough up. That's how you get the best finish on the slingshot. So now let's move to the Jester's kitchen, and I've got a few wrapped up frames, and we'll talk a bit about them. And I'm still recording. Okay, so let me show you a few finished frames that I haven't banded yet. It's in the next process. As I explained in episode 1, I kind of make them when it's crappy weather outside and that, and I just make the frame and I sit it there and leave it, and eventually I use it and band it up and use it for a few weeks, put it in the box with the rest of them. Incidentally, there's a lot of flies around today because it's just rained outside, and it always happens in October for some reason. So, right, let's have a look. For example, we have a citrus frame over here. This will be able to take heavy bands. You'd never be able to flex that, right? So this is an example of what I just said before, where I had a really fat branch on this one, really skinny branch on this one. So what I did was I whittled away at this one until it got to a point where this and this here were almost equal. And I kind of hold it like this. The brace is nice. As you can see, there's about an inch from my finger, as I was saying before, to the top, and about an inch to the bottom. Sometimes I cut these as an angle, sometimes I cut them straight. It doesn't really matter. It's not important. So that's a kind of citrus one finished off. Now, because in episode 1 my lighting was so crap here, I've got a few birch frames that are spalted. They came from a dead tree. And I'm gonna try and make sure that you see it properly this time. See these beautiful markings that you get on the wood. This one's even got a wormhole. It marks up really nicely, and as you can see, the finish is quite nice too. But I use 600 grit to finish this. I'll show you quickly a few of them, a few of the birch frames here. See them, colors are all really beautiful, and that's nature, yeah. I mean, the wood normally is just this reddish colored wood. I even leave these features in my slingshots. As you machine them down, sometimes you get worms, grubs that dig around underneath the bark. So when you debark it, you get left with these squiggles on the side of the slingshot. And because it's a natural slingshot, I like that. I like having that sort of little feature of nature included in there. So that's another citrus one. A short one, same thing. I had to carve away a fair bit of that to make the ends equal. That's the importance of the equal ends. We'll discuss in the episode about banding your slingshot. I don't know what wood this was, but it was a bit pulpy, and I'm not too happy with this slingshot, but I might actually find some way of reinforcing it, maybe drilling it and putting a rod through the middle of it or something. Once again, very nicely spalted wood. So these frames are made out of cherry wood. Cherry wood is quite an interesting wood, in as much as you can go really narrow with the slingshots. I mean, you cannot break that. It doesn't matter how hard you try, you can't even flex it. It's that strong. With cherry wood, this looks like a chicken's foot, doesn't it? With an amputated toe. Well, it's actually a thumb brace. See, once again, I use the features of the wood. So that one's going to be held like that with the thumb against that. So sometimes I take the bark off the cherry wood, like so. But it's such a beautiful timber. The bark on it is so beautiful that sometimes I leave the bark on. This is another example of using the natural shape of the wood. I mean, I could have machined that down flat, but my index finger, you can see, sits perfectly there. So when I hold this slingshot, I'm really kind of comfortable. And it's a little hammer grip with a really low fork. And sometimes I leave the bark on the bottom half and I take the bark off the top half. And you get this two-tone effect here. Now, I don't know what tree these come from, but I think they came from a fig tree. These are pretty wacky shaped slingshots. They're experimentals. This one sits really comfortably in the hand, even though the handle's kind of offset. It just kind of braces nicely in the hand, if you can see that. And this one, I've actually machined finger grooves in it right there. So you can actually hold it like that, but it's angled so that you're not holding the slingshot that way, but you're holding it that way, which is what I naturally do with slingshots anyway. What you have to watch out for with a frame like this is that you don't shoot yourself in the hand right there. As you can see, my hand's pretty scarred over here from all the ball bearings. I've actually got one that's an entry wound and an exit wound from a few months back with an 8mm steel ball. Okay, so now let me stop here and I'll show you a few finished results from up close. Okay, so a few of the finished products. So now you can see the range of what I do with the woods. The first thing I do is I might have a slingshot and I would leave it in its natural shape. End result would be something that looks like this. You'll see that most of my slingshots, the bands are attached to the frame with the wrap and tuck method. I mean, it's what everybody does, but I do have a few slingshots where I use a ringing method just to experiment and try it out. Sometimes they work and sometimes they just slap you in the face depending on how good the method is. So as you can see, that timber is nicely finished but not too shiny. I learned the too shiny lesson. As soon as you get a sweaty hand, the slingshot starts slipping in your hand. This is from that batch of cypress that I got in there from that winter. This is a finished one. It's got a kind of oval shape, once again taking into consideration the natural shape of the wood. I did not sculpt this, that's the shape of the wood, right? But when you grab it in your hand, it kind of sits really nicely in your hand, like the difference between a square and a circular screwdriver. So this one I tend to use a hammer grip, shoot on a hammer grip. And once again, the timber, if you let it age properly, it looks really nice. So now we've got a cypress one, a citrus one. This came from, I think it came from my orange tree in my yard actually. So what I did with this, I gave it a classic profile. I made, as you can see, the ends or the fork is really thick. You know, you can put anything on this. I mean, you can put 50 kilos of draw weight if you want. It sits there nicely in the hand. The palm swell sits nicely inside your palm. I shoot this on a hammer grip once again, but that's the reason I don't shoot it much, because I don't like shooting much hammer grip. I prefer pinch grip. I mean, you can shoot this in a pinch grip too, but this kind of grip is just designed for a hammer, to grab it in a hammer. So now here's a couple of sculptees that... This is another spalted birch, as you can see, the beautiful colors on the birch there. So once again, this one, what I did was I started off with a piece of wood which was kind of broken off, but I just thought I'd do something with it anyway. And I cut this groove here for the thumb and that groove there for the index finger, and then I wrap my finger around the slingshot like that, like so, and put pencil marks on the inside of my fingers, grab a rasp and cut these finger grooves. And as you can see, they come down at an angle. If you look at my first slingshots, they actually came straight and they kind of made you twist your fingers in an awkward way and threw the aim off. These things have to be at about a 25-degree angle, which is the angle your fingers seem to settle at. So that was almost a salvage from a dead piece of wood. And like I told you yesterday, this is my favorite. This is a cherry wood one. As you can see, it gets a lot of use. That's why it's so shiny up here where my fingers actually wrap around it. Once again, I used the same method. I had to whittle these down a bit to make them equal, because that was a thick branch and that was a skinny one. I kind of left this bit down the back because it acts as a bit of a palm swell. It makes the slingshot that much more comfortable. And the way you grab the slingshot here is like this. As you can see, once again, fingers are at an angle. So the best way to do it is to, if you want to custom make it for your own hand or for somebody's hand, you best make it for that hand. I hold the frame in the right hand. So on the left, I can't use this in my left hand because it just feels really, really awkward. So for a lefty, those finger grooves would actually be at the separate angle, and this palm swell here would be on the other side, so it sits against here. This is just unusable in the left hand. You gotta hold it in your right. You must. It's actually chalk and cheese when you feel the difference from here to here. It's ridiculous. So that's about all I can say about making your own frames. Just one or two last things. When I finished sanding the frame down with 600 and did the process with spraying water and flattening down the fluff and doing it over and over again until I get no fluff out of it, I actually just get boiled linseed oil, put a bit on my hand like that, just teaspoon's worth, and grab the frame and just really rub the linseed oil into it. I let it go for 24 hours and I do it again. What happens is the linseed oil crystallizes. It absorbs into the surface of the wood and crystallizes and brings out these beautiful markings of where you've carved out the wood that normally would not show up. And that's all I really do to them. As far as maintenance is concerned, if they start looking a bit grubby and they start getting a bit dirty, I've got this furniture polish here, which is just a cedar oil polish, and you just hit it with the polish, and you got to give it a couple of days because these polishes and oil, cedar oil, linseed oil, and that, it affects your bands. It perishes your bands when it gets on your bands. So when you apply oil to the frame, be patient. Give it a couple of days. That's it for episode 2. We'll talk in episode 3. I can't remember what we're going to talk about in episode 3, but I'll actually start on that probably tonight or tomorrow. See you later. Next episode. And thanks for subscribing. And if you haven't, why haven't you yet? Bye.